Well now, are you settled? Welcome back to Celticism. Let this place be a resting place. You don't have to close your eyes yet, because here's the trick. Soften them. Let your gaze blur a little. Let the shadows at the edge of the room drift and dance. Breathe. Slow. In and out. And if you drift while I'm speaking, that's fine. The story will keep watch for you. And if some sleepy part of you manages a small kindness before morning, tap like, tap subscribe, and maybe a few words left below. And come back here every night. There'll be a new story waiting, and this room will feel softer each time. For now, let your jaw soften, your shoulders drop, and your eyes stay lazy and half open like a cat at the fire. The first tale of the night is called Faye Carr and the Glade. They said the fairies were gone by the 80s, that they'd slipped out of Ireland with the old songs and the old ways, but Faye Carr said otherwise. She had hands like winter roots and a laugh that sounded like a kettle finding its boil, and she kept a saucer of milk on her windowsill as if the neighbours' talk wouldn't touch her. She lived in a small end terrace house with a narrow garden, a clothesline that sagged, and a thorn hedge that never quite behaved. If you passed the house on a still evening, you might see her looking toward the fields beyond the estate. Not at anything you could name, just at the small piece of distance where the day thins. When her son Paddy was a boy, he sat by her feet and listened. He loved the way she'd lower her voice on a secret and squint at the door as if somebody might be listening from the latch. He loved how the world grew bigger when she spoke, ash trees with tempers, hairs that carried news, mounds in the fields that were older than sorrow. She'd pat his knee and say, "Don't poke a fairy place, love, and don't mock them. If you've nothing better to do, leave a bit of bread out on a walk and walk away without looking back." He promised that's what little boys do. But little boys grow and the world hardens. By the time Paddy hit 15, he'd learned a new language. Results, pay packets, roadworks, things you can measure. He still liked to sit in Faye's kitchen and watch her talk with the kettle like it was an old friend. But when she said the old word fairy, he felt the old warmth step back a pace and something else step forward, a prickly embarrassment he couldn't name. He grew into a man in a house not far from hers. He married, had a son named Aidan, and the years did what years do. They moved without asking permission. Faye kept her saucer of milk on the sill. She saved crusts for the robin. Paddy shook his head and called it harmless, and sometimes he meant it. Aidan loved his granny's stories. He'd sit with his trainers on the wrong feet and his eyes too wide and ask for the one about the king with the torn ear, or the shoemaker who stitched with moonlight, or the fairy tree in the lane that took a bend rather than be cut. Faye told them the way a fiddler plays a tune their hands already know. She never once said, "This is real," She never once said, "This is not." She let the stories be themselves and didn't drag them into a place they wouldn't live. And then school happened. Aidan, bright enough but soft in the mouth with wonder, answered a question no teacher had asked. He told a boy in the yard that the ring in the meadow was where the fairies danced the grass thin. The boy told 3 more. It grew teeth by lunchtime. By Thursday, Aidan had a new name that didn't fit him, and a bruise the colour of a plum under his sleeve he wouldn't show. Paddy hated this. He wasn't a man for shouting. He'd had enough of it when he was small, but anger makes its own heat. He tried to teach the boy the right answers, the safe answers, the ones that got you through a day without trouble. Say it's folklore, he told him. Say it's stories, say your granny's just having a bit of fun. But she isn't, Aidan said, stubborn as a peg in hard ground. She told me the Glade's a crossing place. She told me there's places where the world is thin as eggshell. Leave it, Paddy said. Please, for me. He held out for a while, but holding out is a poor sort of raft when the water's cold. He went to Faye's with his words lined up like soldiers and found they were only breath by the time he stood in her kitchen. He told her gently at first. He told her not so gently after. He came away with a taste like rust in his mouth. She didn't row, she didn't even wince. She held his hand on the way out and said, "You do what you think is best, but don't teach the boy to be ashamed of wonder. It's a poor trade, a very poor trade." And then she squeezed hard, like she used to do when he crossed the road between cars, and let him go. Time tugged at Faye. She shrank the way old people do, like a shirt that's been washed too hot. The cough came early that winter and didn't leave. There were days she didn't light the fire and forgot that she hadn't. There were days the kettle talked and she was a stone. Paddy did the appointments. He learned to say the words like palliative and not show his throat. He told himself it was better this way. A bed in the front room, the neighbour woman checking in, the doctor with a kind face who smelled of soap and rain. He told himself he had done what a son should do, and still there was the dark taste in his mouth, like he'd swallowed the wrong thing and it had set. One clear evening, when the sky was a cold wash of silver and the first star had the room to show itself, Faye asked to be taken out. "Not the hill," she said, her voice as soft as a leaf. "I want the Glade." "Ma," Paddy said, "it's late and it's cold." "Then I'll bring a blanket," she said, and shut her eyes to end the talk. And so he did what sons do. He took the chair with the wheels and the patchwork rug. He called Aidan, who came flying down the stairs with his coat inside out, and he called Declan from over the road, the quiet boy with smudged knees and the good heart, because he was at the house so much he was nearly the furniture. The 3 of them set their hands to the job and rolled Faye to the lane. They left the glow of the estate behind, the yapping dog, the telly noise, the square of yellow behind the curtains. They took the boherine that trimmed the edge of the fields and kept on until the hedges grew old. The ground rose a little and then dipped. The lane pinched in. You could feel it, the place where the air decided it would be different for a while. That was the Glade. Not a ring of mushrooms, not a stage for the grand, just a scooped piece of earth afields with a cross, ringed with ash and hawthorn, foxglove stalks black now for winter, and a place between the trees where the sky came down to touch your face. Even at night it had a colour to it, as if moonlight had been rubbed into the dark. Faye had come here as a girl, and then as a girl who was a mother, and then as a girl who had lines in her face and a son taller than she was. It had been the same every time, which is to say, it had been itself. They pushed her through the gap and onto the old grass. The chair sank a little and then steadied. Paddy tucked the rug tight around her legs. Aidan gathered fallen twigs like a boy who still believes the effort helps. Declan stood with his hands in his sleeves, not sure if he should breathe too loudly in case he spilled something. "Grand," Faye breathed, and that was the largest word she'd said all day. The sky was a bowl turned upside down. The hedge at the far edge held a single light, somebody's window past the trees, like an ember on the tongue of the night. The air had that winter taste that sits high in the nose. They didn't talk much. What would you say that wouldn't break it? After a while, a small sound came, a quick pip from the dark, and a shape flitted from the hawthorn to the low branch over Faye's head and down again, neat as stitching. A robin. Strange enough to see a robin at night. He landed on the back of the chair and then, with the insolence robins have, hopped onto Faye's hand where it lay on the armrest. He weighed nearly nothing, his feet, quick and exact, found her knuckles and stayed there, as if he'd been waiting for somewhere to be. "Look," Aidan whispered, already half standing. "Shh," Declan said, but softly, as if he was afraid the quiet might hear him and be offended. Faye smiled without showing teeth. "There you are," she said to the small weight on her skin. "I thought you'd be along." Paddy swallowed once and found his throat a poor instrument. "It's only a bird," he said, like a man trying to teach the tide about clocks. "Aye," Faye said, "only that." For a time that had no number they watched a small bird be a small bird. Sometimes wonder comes like that, without trick or smoke, and then the hedge made a new sound. Not the thrush's bounce, not the fox's careful knife through grass. It was a hush a bush makes when something that belongs to it steps out. At first, it was only eyes. That happens in winter. Leaves fall and you think you see faces where there are only knots and small caves in the green. But these eyes moved as eyes do, and then blinked as living eyes must, and then the shapes that held them unfolded. They were small as your hand, and thick as your thumb, and thin as your patience, and as clear as your doubt. They were the colour of bark and new nettles and old clay. They stepped onto the grass like cats who already owned it. Some sat with their backs against the stones as if growing from them. One knelt as if it meant to smell the frost. Another stood with its palms out as if warming itself at a fire no one else could see. Paddy made a sound and then turned it into a cough because he could not bear the idea that he was the sort of man who made such sounds. Declan grabbed Aidan's sleeve and Aidan shook him off without looking away. Faye did not lift her hand for them. She did not try to name them. Names are heavy and do not fit everything. She sat and let her face find the expression it had been searching for all week. Ease. It took away 10 years in a breath. The small people, call them the folk if you like, it'll serve, came closer. Close enough to show the way their hair, if hair it was, took the colour of moss when the wind turned, close enough to show the fine grain in their fingers, close enough for Aidan to see that their eyes had rings in them the way a tree has rings when you cut it. One of them sat on the footplate of the chair and put its hands on the rim as if to steady Faye or itself. Another leaned against the wheel and looked up into Faye's face in the clear, unabashed way a child does. The robin flicked his tail and stayed put. Paddy felt something push behind his breastbone. It wasn't anger and it wasn't fear. It was the shape of a thing that comes when proof slides into place and all your careful denials lose their footing. He stared at his mother, and then at the grass, and then at the hedge, and then at the small people who were not his, and not his to keep, and not his to explain, and found his mouth empty of all the words that had done him such service. Aidan wiped his face with his sleeve, and only then noticed that he was crying. Declan wasn't. Declan held himself in a way you'd be proud of, but his mouth was a little open, as if the air had reached out and put a finger against it. Faye lifted her free hand, the one without the robin, and what she did was nothing more than tilt it, palm up, the way you show you're not holding a stone. One of the folk put its tiny palm against hers. If there was a weight, it was very slight. "Thank you for the stories," Faye said after a long time when the words did not rush. "I passed them on as best I could." No one else said a thing. Then she turned her head and looked at Paddy, not a hard look, not a look that demanded, just the sort she'd give him when he was 6 and pretending he hadn't robbed the jar of jam, the sort that said, "I know what's what, and I love you anyway." "I never meant harm," he said before he knew he'd chosen to speak. I only meant the boy to be safe." "He is," she said. "He will be, if he minds where he puts his feet." The robin blinked, and the folk, or the thought of them, or the word we have that almost fits them, shifted on the grass. One of them touched the wheel, almost like a bell rung without sound, and the air seemed to thicken like honey. Faye let out a breath, slow as a tide letting go of a shore. The lines at her eyes softened. You could see the girl in her then, the one who used to climb a gate she shouldn't, the one who used to lie on her back in this very place and count the stars like wishes you weren't allowed to make. "Paddy," she said. "I'm here," he said, and his voice found him again. "Bring the boy back," she said. "Not to prove anything, just to sit and show him how to be quiet in a place that asks for it." "I will," he said, and it was a vow that did not need a priest. She smiled at him the way people smile when the weather breaks at last. Then she looked at Aidan and Declan and lifted the corners of her mouth for them too, as if to say, "See, not everything you love is a trick the world plays on you. Sometimes it's the world itself doing you the kindness of being exactly what it promised." They stayed as long as the cold let them. When Faye grew heavy and her hands slid a little on the armrest, the robin hopped away to the branch and scolded them for the trouble of leaving. The folk drew back into the hedge by degrees, not as if they were going away, but as if the dark had decided it owned them again and would lend them back to the living another time. Paddy tucked the rug tight and set his hands to the chair. As they went through the gap, the wheels brushed the hawthorn and didn't catch. Aidan turned to look back and saw that the glade had resumed its old trick of looking like a piece of ordinary earth where nothing had happened worth telling. Only when they reached the lane did he take Declan's sleeve. "You saw them?" "I did," Declan said, and his voice was careful, as if he was putting a glass down on a table that had already broken one. Paddy didn't speak. He pushed the chair and listened to the sound the small stones made under the tires, and thought of all the times he told the world it was one thing only, and discovered he had been standing in a place that was two things, or three, or 100 if you were in the right mood. He felt foolish and forgiven all at once. Faye slept for most of the next day. The neighbour woman brought soup that smelled of celery and old Sundays and put it on the hob. The doctor came and looked at the girl in Faye's face and nodded as if he could see her too. In the evening she woke for a spell and asked if the bird had come back. "Not yet," Paddy said. "Maybe tomorrow." She closed her eyes and said, "Aye, tomorrow then." Tomorrow found its way to the house without asking. Faye didn't. She stepped out of the world the way a good seam unpicks, neat, tidy, leaving only the line you wish you could keep. They buried her in the newer part of the cemetery, where the stones are even and the names are still surprising. And Paddy stood with his hands in a shape he didn't know, and Aidan laid a slice of bread in the grass, and no one told him to stop. Declan came in his only dark jumper and used his sleeve more than he'd planned. A robin looked down from a holly and then went about its robin business. After, when people had put their mouths around tea and sandwiches and took their coats to the hall, Aidan said, "Will you bring me to the Glade?" Paddy said yes. He said yes to many things after that. Sometimes at evening, when the sky is tired of its day, they go. They don't say much. They don't always bring bread. They sit on the grass and listen to the hedge talk to itself, and every now and then a small weight comes to perch near them, and the world remembers how to be thin as eggshell. They don't tell everyone. Some things you keep in your pocket because that's where they work best. They told Declan's mam so she'd know where he'd gone and why he came home with grass in his cuffs. She shook her head and said a prayer that didn't name anything. That was fine. If a boy at school started up about fairies, Aidan shrugs and says, "It's only stories," and lets the words mean what they need to mean in the moment. Later, he goes to the Glade and leaves very small pieces of very good bread on the stone he thinks might be a doorstep, and he walks away without looking back, because his granny told him to do it that way, and there's no sense in improving what already works. As for Paddy, when the kettle boils in the evening, he sets a saucer on the sill and fills it with milk, because it costs nothing, and some debts want paying whether anyone has written them down or not. He stands at the sink while the street goes about its small, important business, and every so often he lifts his eyes and looks out beyond the estate, to the place where the day thins, and he lets the look be what it is. If you asked him, he wouldn't try to convince you. He'd tell you the lawn needs cutting, and the gate needs a lick of paint, and the price of milk is a joke, and the bus is never when it's meant to be, and the neighbours play the telly too loud when there's a match. He'd tell you all the sensible things he has to hand. And if you asked him again, when the night was soft and the sink was ticking as it cooled, he might say she was right about the bread, and leave it there. For now, let the glade dim, let the hedges hush. Keep your eyes soft a moment more, half open, unfocused, so any passing wonder can find its way through. Let your body float deeper into relaxation as we move slowly into the next tale. And the next story of the night is called Morris Keogh and Himself. Morris Keogh had never belonged. People knew his face, but not his story. They said, "That's Morris, he wanders." But where he came from, no one could tell, not even Morris. He was found as a child under a hawthorn, no name, no kin, a bruise under his eye. He was handed to one orphanage and then another. He grew up half-fed, half-clothed, half-wanted. And when he was old enough to walk away, he walked. By his 30s, he was a drifter. By his 40s, he was a shadow on the road. And by his 50s, he was a name people muttered and nothing more. And one night, he followed a bohering between hedges. The moon was thin, the air was sharp. His boots scraped on gravel, and then he saw it, a figure on the road ahead, not close, not far, still, watching. Two pale eyes shone like drops of milk. Morris stopped. The figure stopped. Morris took a step forward. The figure took a step forward. He stepped back. It stepped back. He moved to the right. It moved to the left. Every move at the exact same time, not a beat late, not a half a second after, the very same instant. It was like sharing a body with something else. "Giagwitch," Morris said, half a whisper, "Hello." "Giagwitch," the figure answered, his voice exactly his voice. Morris's mouth went dry. "Kadesha," he muttered. "What's this?" "Kadesha," the figure repeated, the same words, the same rhythm, at the exact same time. Morris shivered. He raised his right hand. The figure raised its right hand, perfectly matched. He lowered it. It lowered it. He bent his knees. It bent. He lifted his cap. It lifted its cap. He let his cap fall to the road. The other let a cap fall too. But only one cap hit the gravel. Only one lay there. Morris stared. His stomach turned. He spat on the road. At the very same moment, the other spat too. Two spits, same sound, same spot. He clapped his hands. The other clapped at the same time. The sound doubled and cracked in the ears. He coughed. The other coughed with him. The two coughs landed together like one sound split in two. He hummed a small tune, just 3 notes. The figure hummed the same 3 notes with him the same instant. It was his own humming, turned back to him, doubled in the lane. Morris's knees trembled. "Stop it," he said. "Stop it," the figure said with him, their voices falling as one. "Don't go mocking me," he said. "Don't go mocking me," it shouted back, his own roar. He tried to curse. Go to hell. Go to hell. The air tightened. His chest heaved. He tried reason. Tatuan, he whispered, you're there. Tatuan, the other whispered, lips curling. He tried again. Who are you? Who are you? Ah, tell me your name. Ah, tell me your name. Morris's head swam. He felt the night press in. Use your own voice, will you? He pleaded. The figure tilted its head. The eyes gleamed pale. And then it spoke, not in his voice, not in a copy, but in a voice of its own, dry, cracked, and thin. I am what was left behind. Morris stepped back into the hedge. Thorns caught his coat. What you mean? You went out of the bed, the figure said, and I went in. No, Morris croaked. I was found. I was a child in the woods. Yes, found, given a name, given bread, given years, but not yours. Morris clutched his cap in shaking hands. You took my place. The figure's pale eyes widened. I took your place, and you took mine. He felt the truth hit his stomach like a stone. Why now? He whispered. The figure answered. One of us must go back. Back where? To where accounts are kept, to where debts are paid, to where I belong, or you. Morris's throat closed. I don't want this. I don't want it, the figure said. It's Mr. Morris Keogh, he said, desperate. I am Morris Keogh. The figure whispered, It's Mr. Morris Keogh. Its teeth flashed. The words came out, strange and too sharp. He felt faint. He tried to run forward, but the other ran forward toward him. He stopped. It stopped. Exact. Perfect. Same. He raised his hand to strike. The other raised a hand at the same time, same height, same fist, same scar on the knuckle. It was him, and not him. So what happens now? Morris asked. The figure's cracked voice crept through the lane. When two stand where one should stand, the road'll decide. One'll walk on, one will not. Morris let out a low moan. He squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the figure still stood there. He screamed, a wild, tearing scream that shook the hedges. The figure screamed too at the exact same time. One scream doubled, echoing down the bohering. Morris dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, and when he looked up, the road was empty. They found him next morning wandering near the village. His clothes were torn, eyes were wild. He muttered to himself as if someone walked beside him. I'm him, he said. I'm him and he's me. No one asked him more. No one wanted to. From that day on, no one walked that bohereen at night. They took the long road, even in the rain. And if they told the story, they told it plain. Morris Keogh met himself on the road, and one of them had to go back. For now, the bohereen is quiet, the hedges still, and your breath is steady. Breathe in to the count of 4, and out to the count of 4. Let your jaw relax, let your arms loosen, and keep those eyes softened. Rest easy as we move into the next tale. And the next story of the night is called The Thing He Built. There was a time when people feared the fairies. That time had gone. In the towns, folks said the good people were a story for dark evenings. In the country, folks said they were a trick to keep children from hedges and bogs. Men cut whitethorn without blinking. Women laughed at the saucer of milk on the sill. Builders ran new roads straight through old mounds and said the only spirits there were dust and diesel. Some warned against it, old ones with winter in their hair, a few younger ones who had been taught to mind their tongue at certain gates. They were told to catch themselves on. Nothing ever happened, not anymore. In that season, Peter Sullivan began to build. He'd been a carpenter once, and a good one. He could set a hinge so it sang, and run a hand along a table edge and find the piece you missed with your eyes. He'd made cradles and coffins both, with the same careful hands. Then work thinned, and he thinned with it. Years slipped, tools went dull. His shed became a room for spiders and old promises. On a grey morning, one of those mornings that has not yet chosen to rain, Peter woke with a feeling in his hands. Not in his head, in his hands. They buzzed, almost like he'd slept on them wrong. But the tingle stayed. It urged. It said, "Up, now." He made tea. He tried to shake it off. He couldn't. He put the mug down before it reached his mouth, went out to the shed, and pulled the door wide. The smell of old timber and oil and dust came up to meet him like a forgotten song. He sharpened a chisel, he set a beam on the trestles, and he began. He didn't draw a plan. He didn't stand back to measure with his eyes and think what next. His hands knew before his mind did. He cut, he pared, he shaved, he smoothed. He made joints so true they kissed themselves shut without a word. Neighbours passed the low gate and slowed. "Peter, what are you at? Something big by the look of it. What is it?" He looked up with a faraway face and said, "I don't know." They laughed the first day. The second day they said he was joking. The third day they told each other in the shop that he'd lost a step. The fourth day they stopped laughing because it rose. Timbers stood upright like the ribs of a boat. Cross pieces went in. Curves appeared where wood should not want to curve. He steamed pieces and bent them around forms he knocked together in an hour. The work was clean, the cuts were true, the shavings on the floor lay like curls of pale butter. He worked past dinner, past sundown, past sense. He would stop only when his hands shook too much to hold the tool. He slept a little on the bench, woke in the cold and went on. A week passed, 2, the thing took shape. "Peter, what is it?" old May Kelly asked, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "A gate for a giant?" "I don't know," he said again, and meant it. At night he dreamed of an empty doorway with the wind running through it, and woke with the taste of iron in his mouth. In the morning he would find new marks on the timber where he could not remember working, and each mark was exactly the mark he would have made if he had done it. He did not speak of that part to anyone. When the form was strong enough to stand, he set it in the field, not by a house, not on the lane, in the middle. He dug 4 deep sockets, he packed stone, he wedged and levelled. He checked with the plumb bob that barely moved in the wind. The shape stood by itself in the open like a question you cannot answer. It was an arch, 20 feet high, 15 across, freestanding, no wall, no fence, no gate, nothing to join, only itself. He planed and sanded until the grain shone. He polished with oil until his own face blurred in the sheen. Then he set to carving. Small spirals bloomed along the uprights, knots of line that turned inward and outward without meeting. On the inner faces he cut straight, clean strokes in little groups, like tally marks with meaning, ohm-like runes not copied from a book, but from somewhere his hands remembered and his head did not. A boy on a bike stopped and stared and said only, "Jesus." His mother pulled him on by the sleeve and would not look straight at it. A man who had cut a whitethorn last year for a quick path to his shed walked up, sneered at it, spat, and said, "Very nonsense," though no one had used that word. That night the man's bull broke a clean fence and ran until his heart near burst. He was found the next day with a twisted foot and could not rise for the winter. Peter finished on a Monday. He ran the palm of his hand along the last curve. He put the chisel down as gentle as if it were asleep. He stepped back till his heels were in the ditch and looked up. He had no clue, even then, why he had built it. He felt pride, but not like pride for a table made square or a child laid to rest in a soft-lined box. This pride was older than him. It stood him up inside. It filled his eyes with water he would not let fall. He stood until the light changed. The arch stood with him. If the wind moved, it did not touch the wood. At dusk, the clouds gathered from every corner, a low bank from the west, a bruise from the south, a great dull lid from the north. The east sent a wind that smelled of river stones. The first lightning came without thunder. It split the clouds in a thin green seam, like someone had cut the sky and not yet decided what to let through. The next bolt was orange, like iron pulled from a forge, then green again, then orange, back and forth, as if the storm were breathing in 2 colors. He went out to the field. He could not have stayed in the house if the walls were gold. He stood at the foot of the arch with his head thrown back like a man at a holy well. With each flash he saw shapes in the clouds, at first only tricks of the eye, but then not tricks, lines of riders, antlers caught and tossed the light, banners with no emblems he knew, wings that beat without feathers, dogs with eyes like coals and mouths that did not close, a thin woman crying a sound he felt in his teeth more than he heard. The sky was full of a host going somewhere in a hurry. The arch hummed. It was not the sound you would hear if you were listening with the part of you that hears engines and clocks. It was a sound that you hear with your bones, The runes glowed the same green as the lightning. The spirals held a dull orange like banked fire. "Peter," May Kelly would say later, "you shouldn't have gone out." "I couldn't have stayed in," he would answer, but not to her face. The air thickened until he felt he could push it with his hand like a curtain. The hair rose on his arms, his teeth ached with the pressure. The next bolt struck not the ground, not a tree, but the empty space inside the arch. Light filled it, held there, bowed the air for the length of a breath, and then another. The doorway that was not a doorway had a skin. It flashed, not like water or glass, but like something you have not seen and cannot name and know at once. They came through. They were too many and too quick to count. Some went on the ground without touching it. Some went through and up as if the sky had been set lower just for them. Some had no shape that would sit long enough for the eye to make sense. Some looked like men you would not look at twice if you met them in daylight, which is a thing to mind. They didn't look left or right, they didn't greet, they didn't curse, they went to where they meant to go. The arch shuddered, each timber in the wood, each note in its grain sang with strain and joy. It was a thing made for this. Peter fell to his knees without knowing he'd knelt. His hands went to the ground like he was trying to hold the earth to stop it from shaking out from under him. A last long flash, green and orange folded together. The humming stopped. The light went. The pressure in the air let go like someone untying a knot. Darkness. Not the same darkness that had come before, a dark that had been used and set back down. Rain fell in a sheet and ended. The wind went from a gale to nothing with no kindness in between. Somewhere far off, a gate rattled and went still. Peter stayed where he was until his knees told him they were wet and cold. He rose up like a much older man, and he looked up. There was no arch, not broken or toppled or burned black, just gone. In its place, a heap of ash that was still warm. He reached out and touched it. It smeared his fingers grey. It smelled not of fire, but of dry sap and endings. Around the ash, a ring had risen in the grass, mushrooms pale as milk. Some were as big as plates, some as small as coins. All were fresh, as if the earth had made them quick, so would not stand there naked. A perfect circle, 15 feet across, right where his work had stood. Peter stood on one side of it, did not step over, not out of fear, not out of courage, out of the knowledge in the part of him that had made the thing to begin with without asking him. The dawn came up mean and clear. Men on their way to work slowed and said, "Would you look?" One woman crossed herself without meaning to and carried on as if she had not. "Where is it?" Mary Kelly asked. "It's gone," he said. "What you mean, gone?" "I mean, gone." He didn't tell her about the ash. He brushed it with his boot until it made no shape anyone else could see. He didn't tell anyone about the glow in the runes, the shapes in the sky, the way the light had a skin. He went into the house and washed his hands and watched the water turn grey and run away. He poured tea, did not drink it. He slept in the chair with his boots on and woke to the sense that the house had moved a half-inch to the left and then back again as if the world had coughed. In the days after, talk ran and ran. Someone said a tractor stalled beside the circle and would not start again until it was dragged a field's length away. Someone said a lad kicked at a mushroom and fell that evening with a fever that burned like a coal and left him pale for a month. Someone said a woman broke a thorn and found her hands swollen like gloves before morning. Someone said a man with loud opinions about nonsense did not know his name for an hour, and when he found it again, he kept it quiet. Milk soured in a kitchen that had never had a bad pan. Bread went flat in an oven that had never failed. A row of beans that had always been generous turned their leaves and wouldn't look at the sun. No one said a word about fairies in the pub, but 3 men stopped walking across a certain field at dusk and went the long way round by the road. And a woman who had never had time for such changed the place she put her washing line, though she told herself it was for the wind. As for Peter, he went to the circle each morning and stood on the safe side and took his hat off and held it in both hands like a man at Mass. He didn't ask for anything. He didn't say thanks. He stood. Sometimes he counted the mushrooms. They changed by a few each day. Sometimes he thought he heard a hammer in the far hedge, very faint, tapping in a measure he knew. People came to him and said, "Peter, why did you build it?" "I don't know," he said. "And what was it for?" "I don't know." "And where did it go?" "It went." Some said he had made a fairy style. Some said he had repaired a road that could not be seen. Some said he had opened a door that was nobody's business to open. He didn't argue. He didn't agree. He sharpened his chisels. He oiled the plane, and he waited. On certain nights, green crept into the northern sky like a bruise, though no forecast had promised lights. On others, orange flickered on the underbelly of the clouds with no fire below to make it. Twice a dog barked and barked at nothing until it lay down and slept like it had been told. Once the bell in the old church rang 3 times at 2 in the morning with no wind to move the rope and no hand on it, and the priest, who had no time for such, did not mention it in his sermon. There are people who will tell you this is nonsense and people who will tell you it's gospel. The truth sits between the two like a stone in a field. You can walk around it or you can stub your toe, but it will not move for your talk. In time, children were told not to run through the ring. They asked why. They were told, "Because I said." Some left a biscuit or a bit of bread on the wall and walked away without turning their head. The old ones nodded when they heard and said nothing that would be written down. Years on, when the story got told, it always began the same way. There was a time when people feared the fairies. That time had gone. And then Peter Sullivan built a doorway with no wall. And the storm came green and orange, and after, life went crooked again. No one could say, not proper, what he'd made or why, only that he'd made it beautifully, only that it had been used, only that the land remembered. And from that day on, when folk spoke badly of the good people, little things frayed, tea turned, tools went missing and were found in plain sight where they had not been. A thought left the head mid-sentence, it would not come back, not for love or money. Once a man shouted at the ring and woke the next morning, gentle as butter, and stayed that way to the end of his days, as if something in him had been taken out and set down and not returned. Peter grew old. He made small things again, boxes, a stool for the neighbour with her hip gone. He ran his thumb along good edges and felt for the piece of work that did not change the sky. On a quiet evening, when the swallows were stitching the last of the light together and the road was soft as dust, he walked to the circle with his cap in his hand. He stood a time. He nodded like a man taking his leave of another man at a gate. He went home. In the night, 2 colors moved at the horizon and were gone. No one ever built in that field. No one swung a spade in it without thinking twice. The ring grew and shrank and moved a little, as such rings do, but it never left altogether. And if you passed by there now, you might see nothing at all, a piece of ground, a cow, a ladder left out too long and gone silver with weather. Or you might feel a prickle at the back of your neck and make a small sound with your tongue you did not know you knew, the one your grandmother made when she poured milk into a saucer for the cat, though she had no cat. It is your choice which of those is truer, but if you're wise, and you must speak of it, you will mind your tongue, because there was a time when people feared the fairies. That time had gone, and then it did not. Let the storm fade, let the green and the orange drain from the clouds. The field is quiet again, the arch is gone, only the ring remains. Breathe in slowly, breathe out slower, soften your brow, relax. If these stories kept you company, please like and subscribe, and in the morning drop a little comment to let me know how you got on. And come back here every night. Let this be your resting place. I'll meet you again by the hedge, by the wall, by the ring that only shows itself when you're ready to see it. For now, the wind is low. The storm is easing you deeper into sleep. You're safe. You're relaxed. Good night.